Hey everyone, it's Alex Ball with another episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast. On today's episode, we chat all about saying goodbye to my old farmland and embracing renting land while setting up new no-till beds for my farm, Old City Acres. We chat with two very special guests. First, Farmer Jackson comes on to discuss setting up his brand new market garden site. And second, my good friend Seth Torkelson-Regan, who helped me convert my forested farmland into no-till beds, comes on to discuss the good old days at Old City Acres. We chat all about renting versus owning, setting up brand new no-till beds, and the emotional and physical toll of owning your own farmland. So without any further ado, let's get to the show.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast is brought to you by Ohio Earth Food. If you grow plants, you know that to a farm of any size, your soil is your most steadfast partner, an asset worthy of investing in. Since 1972, Ohio Earth Food has been the go-to source for the highest performing and most cost-effective granular and liquid fertilizers, seed starting soils, foliar sprays, and disease and insect controls, all approved for use on organic farms. They deliver them right to your farm, too. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in their Plant Pro and the Seed Catapult potting soils, and put their ReVita fertilizers in your soil before you plant, and rest assured that your plants will have all the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. These natural blends utilize compost, kelp, and humate, and are low salt index safe for high tunnels. Feed your soils and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com. Now with branches in Ohio and Wisconsin. ohioearthfood.com. All right, enjoy the show.
Just how I'm approaching this farm is I'm surprised at how different it's been since from our last farm, you know?
Yeah.
Because my mindset on the last farm, which was like our fifth, was still like, I'm just going to do everything myself, you know, and I'm going to work 80 hours a week until things start to make sense. And this farm, it's after being away from farming for a couple of years and going back at it again. One, proper bed prep, like stop making excuses and set up your field correctly. And I mean, you know, we've only been growing for one season, and I'm already just like amazed at following the advice that we kept giving to people, but I never took seriously myself. Like, no, seriously, leave the tarp on all summer.
Yeah.
And then the other one is just like, you know, farming part-time, so long as you're not taking advantage of the market by undercutting prices. And so long as you're actually treating it like a business that stands on its own. You know, I'm not investing a bunch of money into this to just lose money to say that I have a farm. You know, it's like the farm's got to stand on its own 2 feet. And granted, we put up like $10,000 of our savings. And then, you know, we had some tools left over from the last farm. The farm has to do the work of the farm, and treating it that way. You know, I think if you follow those two rules, what is it? Josh sat and said, "Ain't no harm in part-time farming."
Yeah.
Because he did half and half for a long time. So yeah, and you know, we're situated in town, so my access to high quality labor here is way better than it was, because we were out in the middle of nowhere at the last property.
Are you still selling the same clientele?
Good, but they were. Huh?
It's still the same clientele you're selling to, or is it...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, picking up right where we left off in the market that we were in, and yeah, just I mean, right out of the gate, started selling out. You know, which is great. That because we were a little worried about not having a CSA. Granted, we also cut our production in half. You know, we're not producing for CSA. We're producing for just what we could expect to sell at the market, and we're not trying to overproduce either. You know. Not trying to overshoot that. I mean, we had a lot of data leading up to when we left off. We had like 4 or 5 years of sales records in Square, which is valuable, you know. And I went back and looked at those, re-signed into my account. It's like, how many cares were we selling at this point last year, or the last year we were at market? And I timed it perfectly. We're taking just what we can sell, and it's working out pretty good. So
that's fantastic. Besides kind of like the shift in marketing, how you're selling this product, how about as you said, bed prep? Has it been different bed widths? How's the layout of this changing with the new farm?
Yeah, when we started this new garden, I had settled on the field size, or the cultivated area, being about half an acre. That's what I feel comfortable in terms of scale, and in terms of labor, to have essentially like 1.5 full-time equivalents, maybe 2, once we're really up and running. But then, it's like, one, I want to set up the plots correctly. Like if I could go back and do it all again, which, I mean, that's the opportunity I've been given, how would I really want to do it? And even though I was chomping at the bit, we were, so I'm going to back up a second. So we're leasing land from our church. It's the 2-acre field that we're leasing has water, a barn, electricity. It's wonderful. But it's like, okay, I don't have to produce right now. How would I go about setting it up if I'm not sort of like under that gun? It's like, okay, we are dealing with a lot of Johnson grass back here. That's like our biggest weed issue. And Johnson grass in a no-till system can be devastating. So I really was cautious. And what we did is we broke our half-acre production into 4 plots. Conveniently, inside of a 50 by 100 of those tarps out. So we have 4 quadrants, 4 small fields inside of our big field. And that equaled about a half an acre. And I left those tarps on there. One of them for 3 months, one for close to between 4 and 6 months, one for 6 months, and then one for a full year. The one that I left on there, the shortest amount of time, it was through the summer. So once we got the okay, that was in maybe May of last year, I immediately ordered the tarps and put them down. I pulled them up in time to prepare ground for fall carrots and garlic. So I'd left them on most of the summer, the heat of the summer. And then when I pulled them back, I had done my soil test already. And we use Logan Labs, and you can pay a few dollars more, I think it is, and get a complete agronomic readout of this is what you should apply based on the materials that you want to use, which is great. You need this much, rock phosphate, or this much zinc, or whatever. So peel the tarps back, add my mineral amendments. Now, we weren't fortunate enough to have the money to pay for all 6 inches of compost to put down on each plot. But I did put down the mineral amendments, and I did rotary plow it with a BCS. Waited for a good rain, and then put the tarp back on. Now, we did that because my thinking is hopefully that few months in the summer took care of the Johnson grass. We're going to come see next May whether or not that was the case, right? If it comes back in that plot. But the other plots I'm pretty satisfied with. So one we left on there for a few months longer. Same thing. We peeled the tarp back, spread out our mineral amendments, plowed it up with a rotary plow, waited for a rain, put the tarp back on. So the first tarping took care of our perennial weed issues. Second tarping took care of our annual weed issues. So then I pull it back, and then I form beds, and then start growing. And in some plots, we were fortunate enough to walk through those series of steps, pull the tarp off, amend, plow, put the tarp back on, pull the tarp back off, and sow a cover crop. So I was giving you a little virtual walk around here, and this beautiful green rectangle that I have out in this plot was what we did. So we were able to pull it back before it got too late in the winter, and sow crimson clover and wheat, and get that established. So it's like if we've done our job and taken care of our weeds, that should be a pretty weed-free cover crop. And then it's going to get established before any of the annuals get established again. So that was the idea as far as plot preparation. And I feel like that's where past me would always get into trouble, was just jumping the gun and like not leaving the tarp on long enough, or just assuming that I took care of a weed issue. But then when you've got the luxury of being able to wait 6 months before you have to start realizing any revenue, or I mean, for us, it was like 9 months before we started realizing any revenue, you can really make sure you have that under control before you start building beds or going into production.
Yeah, it's great you had the opportunity to really establish that, because that field looked beautiful. It looked weed-free. It looked really nice.
It looks great. I mean, there are a couple of little spots, but it is absolutely manageable, we are also very close to an airport, so you're hearing a helicopter go right overhead right now. The experiences of urban farming.
Yes,
I never considered, but I mean, it like there's still a few weeds. I mean, because we're not deep compost mulching on this farm, because we just don't have access to that type of material. And we can get into this if you want to a little bit, sort of how I'm working my way around that. Like, there's still cultivation that needs to happen. But it's nowhere near the level that it was when we didn't have that luxury of keeping the tarp on and taking care of it in the first place.
Yeah. Being able to put all that labor up front just saves so much down the road time, especially in the middle of July. You don't want to be dealing with those weeds and all that wasted time. If you can take all that labor and kind of like a battery and store it all in this, a year ahead of time, and now in the middle of July, you can be making money. You can sell salad bits and tomatoes and not be out there pulling out thistle or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, we've still got a little bit of dock out there. Evidently, like 6 months under a tarp, dock does not care. But that wasn't a big issue out there for us. The field drains well. It wasn't really compacted, so we just don't have a lot of dock. But I did notice that dock could care less about being tarp for 6 months. It'll come back. But that's an easy one to deal with compared to Johnson grass. So yeah, we don't have access. I can't bury things in compost. So we've kind of had to work around that system a little bit. So what I did, the first thing that I did was, say I've got that blank slate, and I'm going to start planting. I'll pull the tarp off the second time, and depending on the state of the soil, because after that rotary plowing, it's loose. Depending on whether or not I'm sowing a deep-rooted crop or planting a deep-rooted crop, I will broad fork. So I broad fork before we sowed our carrots and put our garlic in. I did not broad fork the beds that I was planting lettuce and kale and spinach or radishes. But I will broad fork before carrots every time, and then maybe before tomatoes and peppers, and so it'll be a crop by crop basis. But so I will line my beds out. I do them 3 foot wide with 2 foot pathways. So I took the standard 30-inch wide bed with 18-inch pathways, and I just extended each of them 6 inches.
Okay.
Part of that was I like my bed standard all over the place, and if you're on that 4 foot center, doing consecutive rows of tomatoes, it's just very claustrophobic to me. So I pushed that out a little bit so that I can move around in my tomato situation. And the other thing was, we're not shy about growing a lot of broccoli in the spring and the fall, or Brussels sprouts. And I did not like bed spacing that close, because you could not walk around in there without just smashing everything. It felt like, we're not just like salad and carrots, and we can grow some big stuff. And I like the ability to move ergonomically and comfortably within my rows. And the same with like any employees that I have too, or just people that are out helping or visiting the farm. I want them to be able to walk and not have to feel like they tiptoe.
Yeah.
Because as I get, you can tell as I get older, all this gray right here. I just want I want to be able to move easily and comfortably in every space in my farm.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why we got the risers on our caterpillar tunnels, the 18-inch risers. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it makes a big difference when you're working on those side beds. Just being able to stand up
Yeah.
in that part of the tunnel without having to, because I'm pretty tall, without having to hunch my head. So that was the decision to widen it out. When it comes to carrots, I can fit an extra row or two of carrots to make up the difference. So, I mean, are we losing a little bit of money that way per square foot? Maybe a little. But I'm really, as I'm pushing 40 and starting a farm again, it's like, I just want to make this as comfortable as it can be, because vegetables can wear you out.
And if you're always stepping over stuff and breaks whatever, like that, there's a cost to like bad ergonomics. Like those things affect flow, and especially when you have people on your farm, like the value that someone creates, you don't want like that value being destroyed of like damaged crops or someone doesn't like being there. I was talking to a farm recently, and they started out with 150-foot rows, and they were saying that their employees were having like such a mental block because the walking so far down was messing their heads up. So they went down to 3 50-foot beds, and that it just felt so much mentally easier to handle.
That's exactly what I did. Is I cut it down to 50 foot from 100 foot, and part of that was just like, oh look, it's the size of a tarp. The tarps that we all have. And so, part of my design, 50 foot. So there are a few reasons why I chose 50 foot. One, if you have a caterpillar tunnel, which is what I have out here right now, passive ventilation can happen with the end walls open at 50 feet. Beyond 50 feet, you develop a dead zone in the middle where you have to worry about rolling up sidewalls or pinning up the sides or whatever. And, I've talked to several other growers, and we found that when we shorten them to 50 feet and we open the end walls up completely, we far less often have to worry about the sidewalls or the state of the sidewalls. So that was really helpful. If I'm going to be farming off-site, if I'm going to be traveling to my farm, I don't want to have to be out here first thing in the morning or at the very end of the day worrying about ventilation. Yeah. So I thought that was the easiest dimension, the easiest length to deal with passive ventilation. So I'm not running fans out there or anything right now, nor do I want to be. And so part of that was also like a simplicity thing. The other one was absolutely psychological. Like when you look at a 50-foot bed, it's like I can tackle anything in a 50-foot bed. But you start looking at 100, 200 feet, it's like, I got to weed that. Or harvest those carrots. Like, and then the third thing was everything fits under a 50 by 100 foot tarp. So in any given plot, I have 20 50-foot beds. And those are 5-foot centers, so 3 foot of bed top, 2 foot of aisle. And the reason why I did that was sort of like Frith Farm was the one that had like the tarp system, right? It was like 2 tarps, this many cinder blocks on a pallet that fits in a plot. And I'm not producing as much food as Frith Farm. So I thought, well, let's cut it in half. And then cut it in half again. So really, each 100 by 50 foot section is actually on my field map. That's 2 plots.
Okay, yeah.
So they're all 10 bed plots. All of my sections are in 10 beds at a time. So after a tarp comes off for the second time and I prep my beds, I do my crop mapping in blocks. So depending on the time of year, it goes in block A or block B or block C, and they're all 10 beds. That way, whenever those crops start coming out, a 50 by 50 tarp can go on that spot.
Makes sense.
Or if there's a cover crop, say that crop comes out and I'm prepping and I put a cover crop in after that, then that block can be terminated and a 50 by 50 tarp takes out that block. So it's all standardization. And all of that kind of maps onto, well, how much food can you or do you need to sell? And so when I went back and was doing, my financial analysis and stuff like that, and looking at past production, it was like, at a half acre, we can do the equivalent of 8 blocks of 10 beds. Again, that's roughly. And given the crops that I've chosen, that will generate the money that we need on a seasonal basis. We do year-round growing here. So 50 weeks of the year, we're generally at market, or that's the plan. All of that fits. All of that kind of jives together. And so to me, that's like a systems approach here. The other thing is like when I cover crop, so I'll take a step back. Whenever we prep a bed, I'll broad fork if I need to, and then I'll put down a like 2 to 3 inch layer of leaf mold. Now, underneath that leaf mold, I'll apply any nitrogen fertilizer that I need. My first round of fertilizer on a new plot is always like a composted chicken manure, because I feel like because we don't have access to a good manure base or even a good plant-based compost here, I'm trying to emulate manure to some extent, So I'll put down 545 Revita Pro, however many pounds that I need in a bed. Generally around, I think 5 pounds in a bed is my first application. Again, based on soil tests and other things. And that's my first planting in a bed or in a plot, right? That's how I set it up and go if there's not a cover crop that I established beforehand. And then when that crop is done, I don't just cover crop in my beds. I cover crop the whole plot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So even if the aisle is kind of compacted where we've been walking on it, I'm not going to go through and like till up the aisle, but I will broadcast all of my cover crops. And when I pull like a rake over a bed, a tine rake to improve that seed soil contact to get the cover crop established, I'll just do that in the aisles as well. And of course you can see in the aisle, you can see where the aisles are because those cover crops are not as vigorous, but I'm just cover cropping the aisles anyways, because 2 reasons. One is I like dealing with things on like plot wide approaches instead of specific beds. I'm just not out here enough. I just don't have the hours to do the super high rotation puzzle piecing beds like some folks do. So it simplifies it on my end, time-wise, if I just treat things in 10-bed blocks. But then also beyond that, I feel like it's like an intermediate step between living pathways, because I'm still contributing to my pathways. So say when I establish a cover crop, I go through to terminate it. I'm either going to mow it or stomp it down and pull a tarp over it. And when that tarp comes off, at least the pathway has something, it's covered with residue of some kind. I'm not going to let hopefully anything else establish back in that spot, unless it's a cover crop. But so that's sort of my in-between approach. It's like, I'm not to living pathways yet. I don't know that I will be. But at least my pathway is getting something. At least there's erosion control. At least it's growing something as opposed to nothing.
Yeah, I really like the idea too of like not seeing things as like the bed per bed basis, because let's be honest, those roots are not maintaining themselves in just that small, the vertical of the bed. They're spreading out through that entire thing. And if you look at it as like the block is the bed mentality, kind of sounds what you're doing in a sense.
Yeah,
instead of
that's what I'm doing. And I was showing you around a little bit. Between each of my plots, I left a 10-foot wide grass strip. Now, part of that is just being able to, I wanted to be able to, if I need to, drive a pickup truck down between plots. If we're harvesting something heavy, if I'm moving tunnel parts around, whatever, I want to be able to drive a truck in between all of my paths so that they can reach the head of every bed.
I want to comment on that real fast, actually, because we just moved farm locations as well. And our original site, it was a ribbon zoning, so it's a really long strip of property. So you'd park at the front and then move everything down the line. And now our new site is the same thing. We is like your spot now, is where we can pull our vehicle right up to the field, right up to the tunnels. And we've only been there for a few months, and it's changed my life. Just being able to pull the vehicle up and unload things is like, in the past, we'd have to unload it onto either a track barrow or a wagon and move it down this 400-foot lane over again, back and forth. And just that little bit of time compounds so heavily.
Yeah. Put things on wheel, drive up, just where. I know there's like some, part of this methodology of farming is maximizing space, but even putting a little space into not growing can increase your efficiency that I think makes up for it. Being able to drive the pickup truck to any spot within 25 feet of anything that's going on has been very helpful. And then the plot is the bed. I think has, I don't know that it's ecologically any better. I mean, maybe we're splitting hairs at this point, but I just feel like from being able to manage everything in my brain for simplicity's sake, just like, you know what? While we were walking, I was showing you around. It's like, I will always have one block in garlic. Okay, that's 10 beds. And that's mulch. And then when that garlic comes out, I'll do a little bit of weeding, and then I will sow it into a cover crop. And being able to move blocks around on paper is a lot easier. And in some cases, I do have to sacrifice. Maybe I don't do as many successions of lettuce as I could because I run out of beds in a block. And to me, at this point, it's just like, okay, small price to pay. And like, that's probably terrible advice, right? Don't follow that advice. But part of this is kind of an experiment in going against that trend of like every square foot has to make sense. When really, I'm just trying to simplify this farm, not only in all of the things that I do, but in like how it fits in my head or crop planning. There's a ton of information on super detailed and effective crop planning. And I still use Google Sheets, and I still just treat it very simple. Like, here's the 10 beds I'm working with this next seasonal round. And here's what's going to go in them because here's what I know I can sell. And this is what I want to grow. I've internalized so much of the timing that I really don't have to sit down and paper out all of my successions. And so I'm just part of the plot-wide design is just like, just keeping it simple because this is also an experiment in being able to manage this part-time, and so some of the systems need to be simplified. And sometimes I'm not taking advantage of opportunities like succession planting as I could if I were doing it full-time or have more production space. So.
And maximizing production, like just to have more production does not mean you have more profit. You said your system, you're trying to build a system where the product flows to the market, the exact amount, the lean amount, right to your market, and you're producing for that. You could double the production, but that doesn't mean that you can efficiently move that money and make twice the amount.
Right. Yeah. And what I'm doing is, I'm keeping a close eye on my hours. And it just needs, like, what I need is for the farm to make sense. It's not having to provide my full-time living. But what it does need to do is pay me a decent wage at 20 to 25 hours a week. Obviously, we're not there yet. And we had a little tornado incident that kind of threw a wrench in those plans. But, it's part of the experiment. It's one of those situations where if you give somebody 2 hours to do a job, it'll take them 2 hours. If you give them an hour to do the job, it very well could only take them an hour. And so it's just like I feel like the birth of this sort of market garden movement was based on a limitation of space. I am also, much in the way that Ben Hartman was doing it, I'm also trying to apply limitation of time and what systems need to change when you are applying that limitation as well. A huge fan of Ben Hartman. I will be honest, when he was like, yeah, I'm coming out with a third book, my first thought was, what else do you have to add? That is one of the third book is one of my favorite farm books ever. Like
Jadson, it's funny. It's funny because I think that Ben, you, and myself, as all people who kind of got into market gardening, you get in and you want to maximize, you want to push, you want to grow, and then you get to a point you realize you're like, wait a second, just pushing and growing isn't always profitable, and usually it is not profitable. I should say it usually is not. You have to really dial in, follow your numbers, cut costs to stay in this game. I've been farming for 12 years now, and I can't name the amount of people who I've seen fall out of the game because they can't keep things going with their numbers. And is the idea of constant scale. Like, there are growers I talk to in our local community, you go to their farm, they got 5, we call them like nifty hoop tunnels. They've got 10 years in production. They got 10 workers. You're like, man, these people are killing it. And you find out a year later that they didn't make a single dollar out there. They were burning $10,000 a month just to stay in business, right? So really, if you want to be here for the long con, you gotta get those numbers right first.
Well, and I don't, I think the original impetus for this call was like, hey, you got 15 minutes? And
yeah, I know. Sorry.
Oops. No, I mean, cut me off when you gotta go. But when I think about, because we've been there too. We've been at like a full acre of production, and we're not getting the labor that we needed to appropriately manage it. And it was the last year that we had on that farm before we sold it. We cut down to a half acre. Granted, there was like another catastrophe that happened, right? The whole compost contamination thing. We barely got a taste that, at a half acre, everything's starting to work. And we could start to see the light at the end of the financial tunnel, And that's just counterintuitive. Like, cutting my space in half is actually how I make all of this work, instead of like doubling my space. When you constantly expand and double your space, I don't know. I heard it. This was probably like a old Farmer to Farmer podcast episode. They were like, when you scale up and you do not have everything working 100%, then all you do is you scale your problems. And when you scale your problems, you very well could scale them outside of how equipped you are to deal with them. Like, maybe what turns into a hand weeding issue is all of a sudden that's a mechanical tillage or a tractor-based weeding issue now, because you've expanded production. You've expanded it out of your scope. But then, like, when you shrink or when you really keep things tight, everything can be a hand tools job. And it's still cost effective.
I'm really thankful to hear to take time to chat with me for a little about this. And like, it sounds like that realization that a lot of us are into, where it's like, yeah, we got into this game for the passion of it, but now we have to like make the thing make sense. If we're going to be here for the long term, it has to make dollars, and we can't kill ourselves trying to sell a head of lettuce.
Yeah. It's funny. Like, it seems like the thing that I'm telling people. And it's not that I know particularly anymore, but if people ask, like, hey, what do you think about this? Or how do you feel about that? More often than not, it seems like my answer is like, take what you're doing and cut it in half.
Yeah.
And just try it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one more thing that I want to add is for a long time, I think everybody was convinced you had to do this full time. Or maybe you weren't like for real.
Yes.
And I think so long as you're treating it like a business, it has to be able to support itself. The numbers have to make sense. But, I think when we think of markets that are maybe not able to support another full-time grower's amount of produce, it doesn't hurt to do this part-time. In a lot of ways, I feel like that's been kind of a pejorative. You're not doing it full time. Like, maybe what's wrong with you? Or, I also hear a lot of people on our forum or whatever say, hey, we're trying to do this, and within 2 years, both me and my wife, or whatever the situation, both me and my partner are going to be doing this full time. And there's a part of me that's like, wait, like just hold up. Because now that I went from full time, my wife and I, my family, we 100% farm income. Now that I'm in a position where this is my part-time job, and I have another part-time job that I'm fortunate enough that it's food and farm related with a fairly flexible schedule. It's like, I look back on that life that we did have, and it was like, that sucked. Like, it was awful.
Yeah.
It was awful, if we are being honest.
Yeah.
And now, doing it part-time, respecting it as a business, But then, like we want a diversity of crops in the field, like we want a diversity of farms in a market, like we want a diversity of microorganisms and exudates in our soil, like treat your finances that way. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. And if you're doing a little bit of this or a little something, I'm not saying you got to hustle yourself to death, but maybe, do it part-time and then have another job that you like, okay, that support, and make yourself resilient in that way. Because the other thing is, like, if something terrible happens and a tornado knocks out your farm, then, I had another income that I could draw from and we were not in dire straits. Likewise, if I do something and Jesse fires me, I've got a farm that I could fall back on and I could scale if I needed to. So, yeah. And I think that would just unleash a new wave of would-be farmers. People who want to do it as a little more than a hobby, who also want to take it seriously. How can we support that? So.
Well, Jackson, those are great words going forward. And I hope that over the next few months, with the people we interview, with everything goes on no-till, we can hopefully share some of that more with folks and help drive that stigma that, like, hey, listen, part-time farming is no big deal. Most farmers I know who grow 40 acres, 100 acres of corn, they're not farming full-time. They work in the plant too. Yeah. They have something else going on. Ag has always been a multifaceted job. It's never been, I'm just a farmer. You're a farmer, you're a carpenter, you fix horseshoes, whatever it is. Yeah. So I'm hoping we can help drive that and maybe change that statement a little bit over the next few months.
I don't know. It's worth exploring. So anyway, I know you got to go. I'm wishing you all the best with your new farm. Keep us posted. How's that going? Like, real quick.
Yeah, real quick. It's doing fantastic. We just moved locations. I was there all day today, cleaning up beds, prepping. Like, our new site is totally it's drained so much better than our last spot. And by that means it's not underwater. So it's kind of what you said earlier. I don't think we were recording then, but it's right by my house. I mean, we're 5 minutes on the road from my house. Man. We're down the street from our CSA. So we packed all our CSA shares at a local warehouse facility in town and then distribute from there. So it's right down the street from that as well. We're part of a cooperative now. It's a multi-farmer space. So now just being around other growers, just so much more positive in my life. The spot I was in before, I loved it. It was mine, but the community around it wasn't always the best. A lot of gun violence, a lot of things like that I wasn't a huge fan of. So it was nice to be closer to home, closer to friends, and kind of closer to a different mindset,
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. Find your friends.
Yes.
Find your growers.
Yeah.
Don't do it alone.
Awesome, Jats. I'm excited for that, man. Thanks so much for chatting with me today. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, right on. I'm going to go harvest carrots.
Okay, have a great day, man.
All right, see you, man.
A huge thanks again to Jackson for taking time out of his day to chat with me about his new farm. I'm really excited to see everything just get done at his new site. It's fantastic to see how fast he's come back after the huge storm. Those who know, it's when you get hit with a huge storm, a huge loss or whatever, man, it's so difficult to just come back and push through, especially when you lost a lot of money or, all that labor. Man, it just hits you just in the right spot. And to see farmers, the resiliency of local farmers, it always blows me away and makes me proud to be part of such a strong community. So as we keep going on with this episode, I want to do a little shift here, and I want to bring on someone very special to me. One of my best friends, Seth. He worked on the farm with me my very first season, and he was there. We were digging ditches, we were cleaning the property out, and we were getting things done the very few years. And without him, none of this would have been possible. So now as we start transitioning and we sell the old farm property, I'm going through this emotional process. When I came to my farmland, when I was able to finally purchase my farmland, I saw that as like an oasis. I felt that I'd finally made a level of safety and maybe even a level of success as a farmer. Like, I own land, I can do it, I've done it. But I didn't understand what I was truly getting involved with. And I didn't really understand, the total, maybe the work involved with owning your own property, especially if it's a property that was very tired and needed a lot of work and a lot of improvements. So we're going to chat with Seth a little bit, kind of about the good old days of old city acres and kind of the reality of owning farmland. So I want folks to know that, if you want to own farmland, that's fantastic. And you should if that's what you want as far as an agricultural lifestyle. But if your goal is to grow the most amount of food and make the largest profit, much return from that, owning farmland might not be the best decision. So you really need to think those things through. And I hope that after this conversation, you can kind of get an idea of kind of the things that we went through in order to take a piece of tired farmland, forested farmland, and convert that into a functioning no-till farm. So any further wait, let's get to the show with Seth, my really good friend. I appreciate him coming on today.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast is brought to you by Organic Growers School. Join Organic Growers School for their spring conference at Mars Hill University in Western North Carolina, March 8th through 10th, 2024. The spring conference happens over 3 days with over 60 workshops organized into 13 themed tracks, such as mushrooms, cooking, gardening, farming, and living on the land. Plus, that's Farmer Jesse, will be there leading half-day workshops, so you won't want to miss it. Whether you are a home grower, food system advocate, or have a few farming years under your belt, this conference has something for everyone. For more information, visit organicgrowerschool.org/spring-conference. That's organicgrowerschool.org/spring-conference. I will put the link in the show notes. Today's episode is also brought to you by Mowing Organic Seeds. It's seed browsing season, and Mowing Organic Seeds is celebrating their 30 new seed varieties for 2024. These beautiful and productive vegetable, flower, and herb varieties are 100% organic, Non-GMO Project Verified, and trialed for optimal performance in organic growing systems. Whether you're trying to bring your best to your CSA, wholesale assortment, or to the weekly farmers market, Mowing has the professional quality seeds and the grower rep support you need to help get you to harvest. Visit highmowingseeds.com and sign up for your free catalog today. That's highmowingseeds.com. All right, back to the show.
Dude, did I tell you I did the math on how many digits? The two of us combined, did I tell you how much we dug overall?
How much you think?
It was over a mile. It was over a mile of ditches. And here's the worst part about it, is that for every 50 feet of ditches we dug, it created a yard, a cubic yard of material every single time. So
yeah.
So you take that, I had to do the math on that. I wonder how many yards of soil did we manually pick up and move, not including all the compost that we put down.
That we then put down afterwards, yeah.
And put it on top of it. Yeah. In those early years, I feel like we spent, of a 40-hour work week, that's a joke, of sun to sundown, hanging out together, working, we probably spent 20% of the time farming, actually, or growing food. And the rest of the time was hauling compost, wood chips, digging ditches.
Yeah, I'm looking at these pictures now, and my memory is I never used. First of all, you did much more of the technical stuff than I did because you were more adept at it. But my memory, I don't think about. I wasn't using a seeder, or sometimes I was weeding was the thing, and then harvesting eventually. But it just felt like I had a shovel in my hand 75% of the time. Or had a drill and was searching through the snow for tech bolts that I had dropped while trying to put a hoop house up.
Yeah.
My hands were numb and I couldn't do it.
Someone's smart idea was okay, these hoops have to be built in December, early January.
Because I joined you in the fall of 2017.
Yeah, 2017.
Because that's when we cleared the land. Who was the guy who helped? He rented a thing that
that's it's funny. His name is Jason, and he drove his tractor down the street. And it's just funny.
That's right. He was down the street
because but we met him through the farmer's market, and he was just a vendor there. He offered to do it. And funny thing is, after that, I said, "Hey, man, for life, you get free vegetables." So he would come to the farmer's market every week, and we would load him up on vegetables. And he did this for years until he left the market. And then recently, no joke, Seth, he just joined the CSA.
Hey, like me.
Yeah, exactly. Got him back in. But yeah, so yeah, we came out there 2017, and dude, it was in a 3-month period. We cleaned the entire forest out.
Yeah.
Cut down
Burned those brush piles. I remember with Adam.
Yeah, cut down the trees.
Yeah.
Remember the excavator came and used a front end loader and picked
to
up,
rip out the roots. Yeah.
ripped the roots out, and then we burned all that. And,
I remember it looked like that scene. You remember in Lord of the Rings where there's just like the carcasses of bodies, of orcs that they burned.
Yeah.
You just see it, and there's like different mounds. That's what it felt like. Just like mounds of dead tree roots and shrubs and whatnot. Just pockets of them throughout the farm. And then that guy came and tilled the land.
Yeah. And it's funny.
Jason.
It's funny. It's like, I don't think people understand like how much energy it takes to every day to go there and say, okay, for 10 hours a day, I'm just pulling brush all day to burn. That's what we're doing. That's 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It was like 3 months of just like pushing and pushing and pushing. So that first day we got there, we brought that big brush hog in and cut down all the grasses and started. At that point, I don't think we had a chainsaw. I don't know if we did it.
No, the day I ran the chainsaw was when I cut my leg.
You cut your leg. Yeah, you cut your
That was a couple years later. Not a couple years later. That was a couple months later.
Yeah.
Because that's when we were clearing the back.
Yeah.
Where your house eventually went, and that's when I cut my leg with the chainsaw. Yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't go to the hospital. I'm surprised it didn't like get worse than it was.
Nah, escaped by with the urgent care. Glued me up.
Little flesh wound.
Yeah. So it's so interesting because you and I were while we were, we're the same age, and there were definitely some similarities, our paths crossed the map, but like we were in such different places, and also like we had different relationships to the farm and to land. You had this business. You had this business. You were transitioning to owning land. You had a relationship that was ending.
Yeah.
I also was floundering because I had just failed my student teaching. I was newly married. I had moved to a new city where I didn't know anybody. So you were one of my first friends I made. And I had been prepared. I was just finishing school and failed student teaching. And so it's like, this is what I've been building my life towards, and I couldn't do it. What am I doing now? And so I don't remember the exact conversation, but I remember I had been coming out and helping you at the farm, and we were talking about it a lot, and I had some experience working on farms, and you were really brave, and you kind of invited me to come work. And then eventually you were like, I'd really like you to work more as like a partner, not just as like, occasionally or as an hourly laborer. And I remember just feeling like it was such a great moment in our relationship because it was so vulnerable of you to be like, you have this thing you've been building for years.
Yeah.
And I think we both realized like whatever we were doing, we didn't want to do it alone. And
it was searching for the home.
It was searching for a sense of community and a sense of partnership. And I think about what we did that really it was like 12 months. It was like a fall to a fall. Because, for listeners after that, and this was, I think I told you this. I think I was always in it. Like, I'm not in this for a long haul. I was like, I'm going to help you get started, because then I redid my student teaching to finish my degree and become a teacher. And that's eventually what happened a year and a half later. But like 2017 to 2018, what I remember most was just doing absolute shit work and having so much fun.
Yeah.
Like, and only because we were doing it together, and so much it was so laughable.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What's funny about that is that, like you said it earlier, is that at that moment, I think we both needed different types of a home. We both needed a place of stability, or a place of safety. I said earlier, I was going through a horrible divorce, and I was like, I need somewhere to be mine, somewhere that's safe, that I can hold
Yeah.
on to, right? And it sounds like also at the time going through of like this rejection of a job, like, okay, I need a place to land that's accepting. It's like saying, no, we're not going to reject you. We want you here. We need you. You know, it's a sense of ownership. But it's like that land, having that land and owning something, it just filled me with, at that time, a sense of just not just success, but a safety, maybe. A place where it's like, for those who don't know, at that point, the farm had moved like 5 times. We kept getting pushed from piece to piece to piece of land. And even though the piece of property was horrible, piece of bottom swampland, but at least it was mine.
Yeah, it's kind of like, some people buy, like a fixer-upper house, and they're like, it's mine. It's mine to do what I want with. Or you get a junker car and you're like, that's my baby. You know, like a sense of a little bit of control, it's a real sense of pride that we didn't have to ask permission to do X, Y, or Z. Or a sense of like, oh, well, we're going to get whatever and the difference, why a lot of people like owning a home versus renting is like, oh, I can do whatever amendments I want, and I don't ask permission from the landlord, or they're not going to raise rent and boot me off. Now that's probably a naive way of thinking about home ownership and land ownership, though, as you can attest to, because there's all these other things that are out of your control.
But in that moment, though, it was just like, and especially when we were doing agriculture, being able to have something in one place for more than a year, like, surprise is, as I said earlier, even if it was poor land at that time, it felt like, man, I'd rather own the worst than, than be grasping at mediocrity at that time. And I think that's where like a lot of growers end up winding up at, where they might be renting currently or working at another farm. And it's like, well, can I even touch a piece of farmland now, especially with how expensive things have gotten? It's like, I might not even be able to get the down payment. And now for sure, I'm locked in for another, 30, 40 years of my life. This is a lifestyle I'm choosing right now.
That's this element of being locked in.
Yeah.
I can see being a benefit and a curse. So like the fact that you were locked in financially, I can imagine, you could also analogize this to your relationships or whatnot. When you're locked into something, you kind of go, well, I got to do this. I'm going to give it my all. Like I think about the things that we did, such as when the farm was literally 24 inches underwater, when it was more feasible to canoe than walk through the farm. And we were carrying, like 20-pound brick pavers up 7,500 yards to the back of the property to build this more or less like failed Hurricane Katrina wall that was literally just, stacking with mud and whatnot. So we were doing those things. And if this was like a rented piece of property, if you're like, I'm going to trap this spot, you would have bailed
In
so
a heartbeat.
fast.
I would have bailed the first month.
Fast.
Yes, bailed the first month.
Now, one school of thought might be like, yeah, that would have been nice. That would have been smart, because then you wouldn't have stuck it out. You could have pulled your losses earlier. And I don't know the answer to this. But the other sense is that, like, when you have your back to a wall, you fight harder. There's the old story. I don't know if this is true, or it's an old like fable, but of a king whose army was being like approached by a fellow army. So he took his army and backed them up to a cliff where if they step backwards, they fall off. And one of his commanding generals goes, why would we do this? We have no place to go. He says, exactly. They're going to fight like hell because they have no other option.
Yeah.
So it's this element of going, when you have no other option, you fight like hell because it is your last resort. Now, that's not a pleasant way to live. And I think as your experience with Tess, you can only do that for so long, whether in work or relation, if you were in a relationship with someone and you're like fighting like hell and it's still not getting better, you bail that relationship. You go, okay, I can't keep doing this. You can only keep up that energy and that fight for so long.
You really hit that, man, you hit that hard, actually, because I'd forgotten about that time we carried those stones out there. We're pumping water, trying to save things. But you're right. I spent 5 years out there, and after 4 years of digging ditches, installing drainage systems, clearing trees, hauling compost, just trying to build areas up, we finally got into a place where the farm was pumping, was doing really well. And then we got hit with that insane flood. So actually this last year, we got hit with a hailstorm in July, which knocked out all of the field crops. And then in September, got hit with a huge flood that knocked out everything. So at that point, we had just done so much and worked so hard that the idea that flood could happen again, even after this, I just can't even stomach that. I can't even let myself. Yeah. And someone talked to me, and one of my advisors said to me, he said, what if we just say this is going to happen, every 5 years? I said, that's 20% loss every 5 years.
Yeah.
And that scales as, so every 5 years, I'm going to have 100% loss. That's insane when you think about things. So it was like, yeah, we cannot continue to be here and be on this piece of property anymore. And I remember when the flood happened, Seth, I came out of my house, which is on the highest spot on the property. And I looked over and there's a foot of water.
30 feet below sea level.
Exactly. And the last time the flood happened, it was almost half this tall. And all the locals are like, I've never seen it this wet out here before. This is the 1,000-year flood, whatever you want to say. So that
happened every other year.
Yeah. Now it's happening every 5 years. So I'm like, I step out of my house and I look at this water and I say to myself, I can't do this anymore. After 5 years of digging the ditches, of dealing with all the other things that come along with property ownership in a swamp, I just realized I just can't do this. If my goal in life, if my goal for my business is to be a year-round local food business, I can't be a year-round ditch digger property manager. I have to put my efforts forward. It's like, this is not to say that water management systems are that's below me. It's that my job is to go out there and grow food and to feed my community. And if I'm spending all my time trying to make sure my place doesn't flood, then I can't do that.
Well, that's why you're prime candidate for Wayne County, now Washtenaw County.
Exactly.
What's the title?
Drainage Commissioner.
Drainage Commissioner. Drain the swamp.
Drain the swamp.
Drain the swamp. Literally. Actually, don't drain the swamp. Swamps are important. But it's a metaphor. Not really.
Exactly.
But not how it's been used.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, go for Alex. So...
Yeah, so it's in a spot now where we're moving locations, and to be honest with you, the emotional weight is off. It feels great to not have to deal with this issue, the property anymore, and to be a new place that's above sea level, that's managed properly and is not in a swamp. But to let go of that, I said earlier, I was out of a bad relationship. And I feel like this farm, this property became a relationship, right? It became something I'd nurtured over all this time. And it's something that I think about all the time where, all the things are having the property one after another. And that's again, like any bad relationship, you let it go. You push it off, you keep going on. But then one thing happens that's just too big that you can't move on past it. And that double year of the hailstorm and the flood, my heart was broken. My soul was broken. It was stomped down, and I realized that I have nothing else to give to this piece of property. And kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about this level of ownership and having some control over something and having your own thing. Having Old City Acres, my farm, my property. And at that time, to be the only young farmer in town to have property felt like an accomplishment. It felt like people took you seriously, for the first time. But when I say I had to let go of that, it was I mean, it destroyed me. And I spent like 2 weeks in bed after the flood happened when I realized basically, like, even though your dreams are, there's better dreams out there. The dreams I have now are not the ones I had 6 years ago.
Yeah.
But letting go of that and moving on to the next thing was so hard, especially with also losing all your crops. That's the double hitter of them both. In the long term, it was for the best, but emotionally, I mean, it almost killed me.
Yeah, because I'm wondering. One question I have that maybe we'll come back to is like, what would you tell 24-year-old Alex when you bought the farm and when you bought the land that we turned into the farm? What would you tell him? There's this, but so we can come back to that. But there's this other thing that you were saying, or what came to mind as you were talking was this idea of property ownership as a satisfaction of our ego, and maybe there's something particularly American about it, and or and maybe it's more individual.
It's very American.
Yeah, like
it's American dream. It's based on American dreams. Like and the thing is, like, if you own land, you've reached a high status. You've made it. That's how it feels.
Yeah,
and it's funny because I say in the same year or in the same time that I've been at my farm in the 5-6 years, I've seen 3 other young farmers come to Sumter, the town the farm was in, buy land, start a farm business, fail, and then sell that farm and then stop farming altogether. I've seen it happen multiple times in that time period. So, and the reality is that they did the same thing I did, is that they thought that if they owned the land, that would stabilize the business.
It couldn't be touched. Yeah,
it couldn't be touched, right?
But if the land's garbage.
For
what they're doing,
exactly. Then
and you've brought this up so much. Yeah, like for people to turn garbage land. And when we say garbage, meaning not suitable for farming, or a certain type of farming, it's perfectly suitable for living or doing any number of other things. But the amount of capital it takes to insulate yourself from extreme weather, same thing we talk about when we talk about climate change or resiliency. It's like the amount of capital it takes to insulate yourself from extreme weather, or you could broaden it to like market unpredictability or things like that. Most people just don't have that.
At that time, like the farm was like a half acre. We had a 1/4 acre under plastic. Like for a small market garden, for like that, we had a lot under plastic and had done everything we could to like combat extreme weather events. But then you come to the realization that you can't do anything more at this site. You can no longer, you
reached kind of that peak saturation for what you could do.
And it was kind of funny because at the new location, when we set up, we're doing everything under plastic there as well. We've shrunk our production a little bit. We're focusing more on our greens to satisfy our year-round CSA. That we aggregate also other products from other farms as well inside of that. But we're putting all of our production under plastic. We're only growing things protected. And not saying there's anything wrong with field production at all. But, when we might do a little bit, maybe in the summer for a few things, but I just had to know, I had to have my greens under plastic. I had to make sure that those a few things can at least make it to market. I need to just guarantee a few things. And everything doesn't have to make it, but if I can get a few crops the year, that's all, I can be happy with that.
Okay, here's the question. I was asking, here's what I really wanted to ask. Or here's a better formation of the question of what would you tell 24-year-old Alex? If 30-year-old Alex could tell 24-year-old Alex, hey, you're not going to be here forever. You've got 5 years. You have 5 growing years. And in these 5 growing years, you can start and grow your business to take a place else. But you will never, like, no matter what you do, you'll get to a point where you can't grow anymore. Do you think 24-year-old Alex would go, all right, this is my place for 5 years? Or would it be like, no, I need something else? And maybe, it would probably a lot depend on, okay, why wouldn't, like, if you didn't know the reasons or whatnot, but like.
No, good question. No, I think that if I told myself, maybe I'll answer this. The only way I was able to power through all the struggle at that piece of property was telling myself that I was going to die here. That's the truth. Is that because on top of farming there,
these are ditches. This is my grave.
Seth, that's exactly what it was. Is the thing is when you go out,
it's gonna be immaculate. People will come for miles.
Exactly. Be a mausoleum to my work.
Right.
But that's the true. The truth is that I told myself that this acre and a half lot of swampland outside of town that I don't like being, away from my friends, I'm going to die here.
Hey, a girl can dream.
Yeah, it's just like, but that's but I think there's also kind of like the base farmer delusion that we have to still, like you get hit with the worst season ever. I mean, like you've been your life has been ruined and you go to bed and then January 1st, you're like, oh man, well, time to get the seed catalog out and start planning for next year.
What's Johnny's got for me? I mean, that parallels to so many things. We've been talking about relationships before. It's like, part of, or is my wife, Katie, you're a good friend. And I've been talking about this in relation to kids. We have an 8-month-old kid, and we're talking about, can we picture ourselves with another kid? And one of the things that we talk about is like trying to remember what it's like to have a newborn kid, or the really low points of pregnancy. But particularly like having a newborn, or for us, I think month 4 was just unbelievably tough. And it's really like part of it is like you can't remember because in high stress situations, your mental and I don't know the scientific basis for this, whether it be, I don't know what part of your brain controls like long-term memory, but I'm pretty sure that shuts down because I can't remember shit from when my son was a few months old. Yeah. Only if I look at pictures and really talk it through, kind of like, oh, I remember that. And I can remember this very like dark, some of this stuff. Like I remember some joyful things too, but like just so difficult. Yeah. And maybe that's like an evolutionary survival tactic because if we remembered all the bad stuff, we wouldn't do stuff again. People wouldn't have multiple kids. And we wouldn't farm again. We wouldn't get out there and we wouldn't do stuff again. Let's get back to work. It's kind of funny you say that. Or the same thing. Like I have a book. I have a binder that I keep every like mementos from that year teaching. So like from that school year, and it's like a plastic sleeve, and I'm putting cards or cute photos or things, little like trinkets and stuff to remember just the silliness, the playfulness, the fun, like good things from that year. I don't put in like, I don't have like journals of just the drudgery or shit that inevitably happens and sometimes piles up and feels like that is, my work as a teacher. No, I remember the good stuff because it keeps me going through hard times. And then reminds me like, oh yeah, that was really cool. Yeah. Do it again. Okay. Let's do it again. It's like we do. It's like a survival tactic.
And it's funny you say that too. So I feel like this really mirrors like how, especially like most farms, which are businesses, present themselves online on Instagram or on social media, where it's like, when I go out there, I am posting the cream of the crop, the best of the best, what looks good, and then every once in a while it's a little bit of like tragedy, like, oh, tragedy, I feel bad for, but then back to the beautiful things. So that way, then later in the year, I can go and look back and be like, man, my farmer's killing it. You know what I mean? I look so good. Yeah. Who took these photos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In your that like, social media, I just basically describe a physical, like a scrapbook essentially, which is just a physical social media.
Exactly.
But we catalog the same things. We catalog the net positive.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, a term in poker as being like pot committed.
Yeah.
And the idea that, so if you're playing poker and you've put in money, you're playing a hand and you realize, ooh, I might not win this one. In fact, it's almost likely that I won't win this one, but I put in a ton of money to this hand that's sitting in the middle. And if I get lucky, I could win it back. And the idea that, oh, I've got to keep playing because I've already invested this money.
Yeah.
Or I think in
sunk cost fallacy.
Psychology, it's called sunken cost fallacy.
Yeah.
Exactly. I've already put this in. If I cash out now, or if I fold, I will be wasting that money.
Yeah.
And I remember, but in poker, the idea is that once you bet that money, it's not yours anymore. It is gone.
Yeah.
And the song, it's called a fallacy because the idea that like, oh, it's still mine, I still got it. It's still it's like, no, you've invested that. It's gone. It doesn't matter what happens next. It's gone.
Yeah.
And what points in your time at the Belleville farm did you did you find yourself thinking that, fighting that, etc.?
Well, at certain points we started out, and I think that in those first 3 months we put up all the infrastructure. We put up like 4 15 by 100 tunnels, tunnels. We had, we were already putting down compost. We gotten so much going, and that first like three, all the snow melted, and we had a huge little flood happen right away. And in my head, I was like, it's okay, because I'd already spent every single cent I had. And leading up to this, I'd spent 5 years of my young 18 to 22-year-old life saving up every little penny I could to put a small down payment on a piece of trash. You know what I mean? So I'd put so much money into it and invested so heavily. And it's so funny. So many other growers would tell me like, oh yeah, you shouldn't buy wetland. You shouldn't do this. But I was at a point where it's like, well, can I farm with you? I can't. Well, then I guess this piece of wetland is where I'm heading to, right? So we're at this point where, I had only rented land leading up to this, and the rented land was a water bill and a few $100 for some soil. It wasn't almost nothing. And the place I was farming was in Romulus, which is north of town. And Romulus is an old swamp as well, but it's more drained. So the soil's really sandy there. So, everything the water just falls right through the fields, right? So you add compost to try to slow that down a little bit. But going from that type of environment to going to a purely saturated, heavy, wet environment, I didn't understand how much money it would take to develop that out. And you asked, at what point? Well, when we had got to the farm, the property was like $20,000 for an acre and a half of land, a little under $20,000, and we put down, and it ended up costing maybe $5,000 to $8,000. I can't remember. It's been such a long time to go, but immediately after that, we ended up investing another $20,000 in that first year, all on credit cards and on short-term like business loans, just to try to rapidly develop that site. So if I could go back to myself then, if I would have just taken that capital and put it back into, let's say, just put it into operating capital for the business, or just put it into, upgrading our delivery vehicles and then renting land at a much lower rate and saving and paying myself a salary, right? I feel like an idiot sometimes because, I've spent 5 years investing into this thing where I'm like, man, if I would have just taken that business model, which was already evolving at that time, and taking that and putting out some leased land, we could have actually turned a profit much quicker. And all that money, like sunken costs. I've been betting all this money on something I thought was the right thing to do. And it's not saying that buying land is the wrong thing to do, but buying land, we don't have enough capital to sustain it, really, or don't have the money to improve it fully. Because we're at a point at our spot, Seth, we're pushing over $100,000. You know what I mean? And
hold on. Hey, did you hear that, everybody? Hey, honey, come in here. Alex is flexing over here.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's not.
Bring Henry too. He better hear this. This will give him a boost.
But here's the Seth. No one wants to spend $100,000 when you're also donating plasma. You know what I mean? Like, that's just like...
I remember. Or the year you were shoveling snow in the winter and sleeping on my couch rather than drive back to the farm because it was a little bit further away. Oh my God, I felt so bad for those days.
And that's what people, that's what I really want to get clear to people, that you know, if you owning land is fantastic if you have the money for it, but if you don't have the money for it, it can almost ruin your life. You know, there are you said there are points where I'm donating plasma twice a week, which for those who don't know is a needle in your arm, they're taking your blood. Yeah, and even to now I still have like long-term damage to my elbow from it. You know, from going so much. You know, so you donate plasma twice a week, you're shoveling snow and farming full time just to make sure you have enough capital to keep the land going and to develop it. And I look back and see what I did to my body and the hard work I did. I said, man, if I would have been a little bit smarter and not so narrow-sighted into just wanting to own land.
Yeah.
And I think the hard part
go ahead, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, you. Because all the people around me who are in agriculture, you know, they are in it for the land, right? It's an investment piece. It's holding a piece of property for the long term. The way they think about things and the way I understood things was not based on the reality of the life I want to live. But it takes so much time to get through that. And I'm so thankful, though, on the flip side, is that the $100,000 I spent, you know, that's not a total loss. You know, some of those things are still in the land and, you know, is in value and whatever here or there. But I really think it was a lesson. Like, I spent $100,000 to still be farming, to still be in the game, and to learn those hard lessons, and now be able to come out of that, you know, relatively debt free. I feel like it could be a lot. I could have been one of my friends who had to pack up and stop farming. So it's you know, it's really I had to pay to play.
Yeah. So, you know, like, so two things come to mind. One, I'll say that so I don't forget, is this idea of owning land to say that you own land. I'll come back to that. But that relates to what you just said at the end, like pay to play, is like this idea of paying your dues. You got to pay your dues in order to be respected as a farmer. But I don't think owning land is like a due you have to pay, you know, like there's something, and maybe that's like another fallacy of, you know, a profession that you have to suffer. I think that's probably something that we tell ourselves or others to justify the suffering. I had to suffer through this in order to experience this richer thing, or we say it so that we convince other people to go through shit.
Yes. Yeah.
So that, because we don't want to see them have success right away. It's like, oh, that just feels dirty. Yeah. It's like, no, we don't want people to suffer. But we also want people to be grateful and like understand, you know, if they're not suffering or if they've been given a great gift or privilege, we want them to understand that. But, you know, this idea of, as you said, what you would tell younger Alex is if you could at least land, but invested the capital used to develop that land, to use that for like more working operations. It seems that you're telling Alex, hey, young Alex, don't just buy this land just to say that you own land. It'd be like telling someone, I think, which would be good advice too, don't get married just to say that you're married. Yeah. It's like, have you seen When Harry Met Sally?
Yeah.
There's when Billy Crystal's getting divorced and he's saying, I got married because I didn't want to date anymore. Yeah. It's like, that's a crappy reason to get married. Yeah, like you should get married because you want to be with somebody, not because you're like, oh, I'm sick of dating.
Yeah. I bought land. I was tired of leasing.
Because I was tired of leasing.
Yeah.
And also, probably because partly is because leasing comes with its own hassle, just like renting comes with its own hassles. You know, renting a home or dating, you know, comes with its own challenges. But also, I think what often happens is, and we've talked about this a lot with relationships, is people don't like saying that they're leasing. Yeah, people don't like telling others that they're renting when it seems like their friends or peers are buying. People don't like saying that they're dating when it seems, other people are settling down and getting married. Because there's this sense of behindness or otherness.
Yeah.
And the reality is it's not for everybody or not at a particular time in your
You
life.
said that
And
so
so,
well. Because
yeah,
I really
it's
like
so
that.
hard.
We get caught up in it. We get caught up in so
Yeah.
much. And it's like, and I think, as we're searching for legitimacy, all things until we make are trying to come across in a very hard industry. You don't want to go to farmer beer night and be like it's sexy to go, yeah, I own land.
I'm growing in my grandmother's backyard. That isn't as,
Yeah. It's not flashy.
Noteworthy.
Exactly.
It's not flashy.
And even if like that a claim is hurting you, even if it's in the long term, like making you a worse farmer, making you a worse business, you sell yourself this idea of like, okay, just because I can say this thing, it makes me feel so much better. And I went to business school. Like, I know better than this, right? I know better to make decisions based on like just how I feel, how I want this thing, based on the numbers, right? It has to be based on what it costs to do that thing. And when the numbers started going south, when the expenses started rising, I should have said, okay, this is not working. I need to stop doing this. But at that point, had put so much money in, and at that point, to go so young to own farmland and then say, actually, I don't have farmland.
Right.
That feels so much worse.
Yeah. And so like this is connecting. I remember I read a book. What is it called? By Parker Palmer. You look it up real fast. He was a famous teacher and kind of teaching philosopher. I read it during my undergrad. Parker Palmer books. It's called The Courage to Teach. And I remember reading it and discussing it with the class. And one of the things he talks about that is like your fears as a teacher. And for example, like the fear of being disliked by students or colleagues, the fear of being like irrelevant, or the fear of essentially imposter syndrome, the fear of being called, like being shown to be a fraud, and how those fears, if unchecked, can really be a driving motivator for so much of the decisions that we make in our teaching career. And what I'm wondering is, and I'm sure a lot of things, because those aren't things unique to teaching, like imposter syndrome applies in all aspects of life. Are there certain fears, either that you felt, we've kind of talked about some, or you think they're unique to agriculture, that you think people experience that can drive them to possibly make poor decisions?
Yeah. There's one thing that farmers always say to me each other. I hear it every single time. They always go, how much land you farming?
Oh.
Right? They do it every single time. And it's kind of like or a it's super weird. And I think this is the problem I see in farming is the question is how much land you're farming. It's not how much money did you make, how much money did you take home personally this year, and how many hours a week did you have to work in order to earn that. Right?
Yeah, if you want to quantify it better. But the reality is that agriculture doesn't want to do that. Most farmers don't want to talk about that number because the reality is it's a hard number to look at. Ooh, yeah.
It's a hard number to look at. And
in general, we don't like. I'm trying to think. I wouldn't ask that of a teacher.
Yeah. Exactly.
What are you raking in this year?
Exactly. And it's like I talk to growers sometimes, and this is not. I talk to growers who are at a 1/10 of an acre scale to 20. Who there's people on 10th acre right now who are working 80 hours a week, and there's someone on 1,000 acres working 80 hours a week. And there's someone on that 1/4 acre who's putting in the 20 hours part time. Bring home 30K, and there's someone who do the same thing at those are scales, and there's inefficiency at all levels. So this idea that you can it's kind of like an easy way to disguise the reality of your business, saying how many acres you farm in there. Only 4. Well, I guess you're not profitable then. It's an easy way to.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, because I wasn't even deep in the community like you are. And I heard people ask that, how many acres you want? How much land are you got there? And it's not even said maliciously or an intent, but it's just the fact that is the mechanism of quantifying.
Yeah.
Because I think some people are kind of curious to are they want to like label you, are you micro? Are you like market garden? Are you micro? Are you small, medium, big? They want to be like, how are you compared to me in the like work that you're doing?
Yeah.
But people probably, but I know people generally feel more comfortable and they're like, oh, when they say like, oh, I'm on the upper echelon of this label. It's like if I'm a market gardener, I'm like, but that doesn't quantify to success or general happiness or contentness with your work.
It doesn't. Like my long-term goal and constant goal is to always reduce my hours to be done by 5 p.m. every night. And the reality is that I keep my work at about 40 hours of active work on the farm. Then I do maybe about, a little bit of podcasting and I do some consulting, but that ends up being like maybe 2 hours a week on top of everything else. But I found that we had a solid growth pattern, 15, 25% growth every single year. But every year I kept lowering my working hours, right? I kept lowering it and lowering it. And I realized at a certain point that I can work on a rough 9 to 5, sometime, more 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 8 hours a day. And we're growing at the same rate. So at this point, I'm like, then why kill myself? Then why go out there and destroy my body to not make an extra percentage? You know what I mean? And I think something I was talking to Farmer Jackson about this earlier, that, he was saying that there's him and Josh said, like, there's no shame in part-time farming, and there's no shame in like working the hours it takes to do a job, right? So I have an uncle of mine. He's I would say a serial entrepreneur. He started out a company, as 18, and now he's the president of the company. He was talking to me the other day. He said to me, so you're working less hours? And I said, I work for 40, but he said, you'd work less. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, hey, I'm the president. My goal here is to work less. My goal is to work less at this job and make the same amount of money, if not more. And I'm realizing if I go out there and I work more and I made the same amount of money, I'm a sucker. For me, and that's how I'm not trying to say it's not fun being on the farm, and if having fun on the farm and doing things around the property is fun, and that's part of the lifestyle, that's cool. But if my goal is to grow vegetables and sell them to make a living, right? Then my goal then it has to be reduce my labor as much as possible. And for me, if I am working over an insane amount of hours, then I'm not coming home on time to be with my partner Sarah. I'm not giving her the attention she needs. Honestly, our relationship does struggle. It's going to if we don't have the time to be together. And sometimes envious of growers who have their partner with them in the field, but then also I'm like, oh, I'm so thankful I don't have my partner out here with me. I would lose my mind if have to constantly have to work things at home and home things at work. It would drive me crazy. Needless to say, for me, I know that my partner will not tolerate me spending all of my life on the farm. If they're with me because they love me and they expect me to be around, and if I can't, make my salary while spending some of my life with them, then I can't imagine they're staying around too long.
What you said remind me of this. So there's so many parallels to what you're saying about being a young farmer, getting started, and how do you do it in a way that both like grows your business at a reason, like at an appropriate rate, but also doesn't burn you out, destroy you. There's like a near 1-to-1 comparison to that and the classroom teaching.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And so what I'm wondering is like, okay, what's the difference between your situation and my situation? How I've been able to make it through the first 5-6 years of being a teacher. Oh, basically you and I got started. You started your business, Old City Acres, a couple of years before I started like my current teaching job. But you started the farm basically the year before I then went to my current school. So we've been on this similar track. And I'm trying to think what's kept me, like what has been necessary for me staying in the game in the same way that what's been necessary for you staying in the game, whether at that site or others. And a couple things that jump out to me is like, you've got to have, support. You got to have support in and out of your work environment. So like in my work environment, I got colleagues, not only who I like, but who help me out. And not just, and I would say a balance, or at least a combination of both experienced colleagues, people who are smarter than me and who know, like, who can tell me when I need to back off. I think some of the most common advice I got early on was like, Seth, like, don't do that. Like just slow down. Just like pump the brakes. Slow down.
Just say one thing about that real fast is that, like you said about having those people above you and having some mentorship, right? Is having someone to hold you accountable. And like, I think that's so important. Also, so hard in farming. Like, and so many people, like, you're
physically spread out.
I mean,
literally, you're on your plot of land. You're physically spread out. Like, I just have to go next door to the classroom next to me.
Exactly. And maybe this kind of like, and maybe this is a great way to wrap up this conversation. This is something that you really connected on something. Is that those first 5 years of my operation, and then the first 2 or 3 on the farm, I did not have, I would say, a mentor. I did not have somebody who I was going to, another farmer who I looked up to, who was not holding me accountable, but someone I could bounce heavy things off of. And I've had
someone who will tell you what you don't want to hear. Someone you trust who will say like, will say when you need to back off, you'll trust their advice. Yeah.
And I think this all comes down to, the basic conversation, which is looking at things, being honest about them, right?
Yeah.
Having those honest conversations and being willing to be open to other people, when you have problems or when you need help.
Yeah.
Like, when someone asks you about something, don't reply, 10 acres, get back to it. Like we need to have deeper conversations about these things. And really, once we can have conversations about this, we can help like destigmify issues, right? And work through things. So I think if I had a good mentor when I, earlier on in my farm career, they would have said, Alex, don't buy that piece of farmland. Don't do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Keep holding on. We'll help you out. We'll figure it out. The
best advice I ever got about mentorship is find the mentor you want and ask them to mentor you. Do not wait for someone to say, I will mentor you, because they will not. They will not. Even if they are interested in it, they will not say, hey, let me take you under my wing. I mean, like, maybe that happens to some people, but like, you have to be assertive and say, I respect you. I like you. And like, you really, like, I think that is so hard. And has been some of the best advice, best work I've ever done is literally asking people like, can you tell me where I'm off? Or can we talk regularly about this? Because if you as the mentee have to take the initiative and seeking them out and like setting up those systems, because mentors, like, they may be satisfied with it, but they don't need it.
Yeah,
the mentor doesn't need you.
Yeah.
They don't need you. So they're not going to seek you out. The mentee needs you. So you got to seek that out.
Seth, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate your wise words. And
yes,
as for my old partner, I thank you so much for going the journey with me and helping me start the farm. It was some of the best years. It was the most fun years. We had the most fun at farmers markets. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to me for a little bit.
Thank you so much, man. The farm means so much to me. Old Sea Acres means so much, and you mean so much to me. So thank you, Alex.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it. A huge thanks again to Jackson and Seth for both chatting with me today. I've been going through some emotional, maybe stress is the right. It's been hard the last 6 to 7 months. When you get challenged on who you are as your base self. And for me, since I was 18, I've been a farmer and I've been growing food. And when that thing is challenged and you feel as if you are no longer doing that thing, even though I was, even though you own a farm and you're distributing vegetables every week. But the fact that I wasn't growing for a few months, it got in my head. And it really challenged who I was. And it really challenged how I maybe got satisfaction from my livelihood. And I think I got caught up, like so many others do, in these definitions of what a farmer is, or definitions like who's in the local food scene. It's that I'm farming 10 acres full time. If you're not doing that, then you're not a real farmer. Well, I know a lot of growers who are on a quarter acre and are growing, 20, 30 hours a week with quality of life, who feed their community and make a good amount of money on the side. So there's no shame in any scale, any size, any type of production. You have to do what fits best for you. And the minute you start trying to go away from that, stop trying to do what's best for you, best for somebody else, or do what's best we think people want to see. You're going to start going down a route that's going to really challenge you and maybe even personally hurt you. If you see people around you saying you need to be at this scale, you need to be doing this if you want to be in the farm scene, and you do that without the resources that those people have, chances are you're not going to make it. And I thought at my time that I could own farmland because I could purchase farmland. There's a difference. I had enough money to purchase the land, but I didn't really have enough money fully develop, even though we'd spent upwards of $100,000, on materials, on business inputs, on ditch digging, having canals or creeks dug out for us and stuff like that. So it's one of those things where if I had taken that capital and followed my business plan, I would be in a much better place than I am now. That's not me saying I'm in a bad spot now, or that I'm upset or mad, or that I wish I could go back really. But the reality is that money has been spent, is gone. And we have to now just move on, stabilize the business, and do what's best for us. As I said earlier, I see myself lucky to have spent that money to still be in the farming business, still be in the game, and be deeper into the industry. But I want to tell all new growers or even existing growers, if you're in a place right now that's not right for you, whether it be with a farmland, farmer's market, your CSA, your farm, whatever you're doing, if things aren't working and you do not see an end in sight, you need to be honest with yourself and make new plans and adjust, which is hard to do. But, you have to make those hard decisions if you want to run a food business. So this week, we're at a new site. We're putting down tons of new compost, putting down new wood chips, hopefully putting up another tunnel in the next 2 weeks. So we're really getting this new site up and going. And I want to do this episode specifically because I wanted to put a cap on my time at my old farm. I wanted to put a conclusion to it. And I needed to emotionally get those things off my head and off my chest to process that things finally. So now my property is listed for sale. I'm at my new site. We're prepping the soil. We're getting growing, and it feels good. I feel like I'm on the right track, and I feel like a farmer again. I feel like I'm back where I belong. So, it's early March. Time to get out there. Time to get working. The season's just getting started, so we got a lot of work ahead of us. But, take care of yourselves and don't work too hard. Appreciate y'all listening. Have a great day.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. Real quick, some things that we have going on. First, my gosh, has the Patreon page been humming lately? Thank you all so much for the support, and I really hope those discounts on things like seeds and irrigation and boots over there have been helpful. The YouTube channel is going strong with new content for the 2024 growing season. Check out that channel by searching No-Till Growers on YouTube. Some other things. Hannah and I announced our on-farm no-till field days for 2024 at Rough Draft Farmstead. We only do like 3 of these a year because time is just non-existent for me. And tickets are limited because space here is also limited. So check those out if you want to come see my farm here at roughdraftfarmstead.com. As for the other conference stuff, the last conference I'm attending this year that isn't here at my farm will be in Riverside, California at the Grow Riverside and Beyond conference. That is the first week of April, also known as the week before the Final Four. That's how I think of things. So that should be a good time. And with that in mind, make sure that you are on our email list and following us on the Instagram, so you can join the No-Till Growers 3rd Annual Bracket Challenge. It could be the 4th annual, actually. I don't honestly remember, but either way, let's call it 3. All the links for those in the show notes, and also linked in the show notes is our shop where you can find my book, The Living Soil Handbook, and hats and other merch. Buying those things through us helps to support our work and helps keep this information free and open to anyone and everyone. Alternatively, you can join all those new donors who support us at patreon.com/no-till-growers and who not only get a bunch of discounts on various things, but also on things like the farm tour here at my farm. That Patreon page is the absolute lifeblood of our work, and at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, like some of these folks, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Marsh and Cindy, to Kevin, Anna Martin, Country Valley Farm, Laura Britton, Derek Page, Chris Yates, Sean at All About the Garden, Stephen Smith, and Cameron Prybol. Huge shout out to everyone who supports us in whatever way that you can. You all are amazing. Otherwise, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week. Bye.